So, welcome to winter. Last time I saw you, it was August, I think. So all of a sudden it's the middle of December. Well, you know what? We're one day closer to spring, right? That's the way to look at it. We're one day closer to the end of winter. All right. And hey, today, I don't know if you look at the weather coming up, but today is the warmest day for the next 10 days. So for the next week and a half, we're going to be wishing for today, the warmth of today, when it was, we'll be like, remember when it was 44 degrees last Monday? So here we go. Congratulations on finishing your third exam. Where is everybody today? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. There's 14 of you. So I see a 15th coming in. I have 50 some people in this class. Where are you all? So if you're watching this at home, you're supposed to be here. All right. I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad that you finished your third exam. So you guys that are sitting here right in front of me right now are pretty poised to probably not have to take the fourth exam, aren't you? Or worst case scenario, you have that opportunity to use it to replace a lower exam. That was your incentive all semester. So if you've been here consistently, congratulations on that. Keep that good work up. And looking ahead this week, you guys have your My Favorite Thing videos due a week from last night. Okay, so next Sunday night. Get that. How many of you are done already? Is anybody really? One of you. All right. How long have you been done? You finished yesterday? All right. And you, Ashley, you're done too? All right. Okay. None of you, I don't think any of you beat the world record was in one, I think it was my intro class, somebody did it the first week of the semester. Okay, so I remember like, no, it wasn't intro. It was like, it was either this or personality. And, it's called My Favorite Whatever video. And I was like, you can't have a favorite thing yet. Okay, on the first week, we haven't, come on. So I was almost disappointed. So anyway, that's due this coming weekend. And just to remind you all that I call it my favorite brain part, but it doesn't have to be a part. It can, I could have just called it my favorite thing, my favorite topic. Okay. I just thought my favorite brain part had a catchy name. So it doesn't have to be a part. It's totally cool if you do have a part, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a topic. There's a rubric for that, and it's a good idea to look at the rubric to see what the TAs and I are going to be scoring that based on. So if you hit the things that are in the rubric, you'll be in good shape. There's a page for the assignment if you've never discovered it by now, and that page has links to a tips page that hopefully you found already and used for my favorite, for the I Can Do This video. And then there's also a link to like some previous examples of students' presentations. So yeah, for many of you, this is your week to be focusing on that. So one good thing I just realized is that you have this chapter due tonight, right? I think, or tomorrow. When do you be tomorrow? I forget what day I made it due. And then you don't have one due this. We don't have chapter 15 out of 16. Wow, we're almost done. Chapter 15 is not due this coming weekend. So, you don't have a chapter that you have to work on this week. So chapter 15 is due the weekend, after the end of the weekend for Thanksgiving break. And then the final chapter 16 is due like before we begin finals week, the Sunday before finals week. So just after this, if you're done with this chapter, just 2 more to go. Just 2 more to go. All right. As with so many chapters, we're going to cover 4 chapters in one. Look at the topics here. All right. There's really four topics buried in those 3 titles. All right. So here we go. And yeah. So some of this some of it I already covered, so we'll go through kind of some of it quickly. So anyway, one of the first topics that we're going to be covering is emotion, and I've already talked a lot about emotion and the limbic system, and we'll talk more about it, the amygdala and some other structures that are important for regulating the emotions, and particularly fear. Last time, I think I already talked about, the importance of emotion to, the last chapter was about decision making. And how absolutely essential emotion is, and it's not separate from logic or reasoning. It's an absolutely integral part of that. So just a little bit more about what emotions are. Emotions are lots of things. And the way that we're going to be discussing them, they're going to have two components, okay? There's going to be a physical reaction or a physiological reaction. And that's going to include that's going to be a very sort of relatively universal response to emotion, whether it's sadness or anger or happiness and joy and depression or disgust, or just all the strong emotions have a pretty identical physiological reaction. Heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, your palms get sweaty, your throat gets dry, your mouth gets dry, pupils dilate, breathing gets more rapid and shallower. Okay, so these for any strong emotion, we have that's a pretty similar physiological reaction. But then we're also going to be talking about the so-called conscious experience, or the feeling that's associated with the emotion. We're going to see how sometimes these are very separate and sometimes they're similar. The physiological reaction and the conscious determination of what we're feeling. Okay, and we're going to see sometimes we make some mistakes in determining what our emotions truly are. We get our wires crossed, and that's as we're going to see, because the physical reaction is nearly identical. So our poor brain has to figure out from like the same set of signals internally what it has to try. It's like we're leaving it to figure out like what we're feeling when like the input. A good half of the input is identical, okay? So it's not surprising that our brain gets it wrong sometimes, and sometimes overreacts or differently reacts. Okay, so we're also going to try to make a distinction between mood and emotion, okay? So mood is kind of a more just pop term, all right? For general states of feeling and so on. And so emotion is we're going to try to make a distinction between mood and emotion. All right, so a little bit of, yeah.
So, I'm sorry, I was just really intrigued by what you just said, that like even our brain sometimes gets it wrong.
Right.
Or as to what we're feeling. So are you suggesting that like when a bunch of hormones are being released or a bunch of neurons are being released, even our brain sometimes has trouble reading those responses?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Absolutely. I mean, that's half like a good, I don't know, I don't want to make it, we're going to be talking about, there's a physical, the physiological reaction, which the brain is both producing and assessing. And then the so-called cognitive determination of like what we're experiencing, what our past, our present, our future, we got a logical part of our.
So even the brain doesn't know itself, like.
Oh, how many times have you been like, you're crying. You're like, why am I crying? Why am I upset? I don't, or why am I so angry? Why am I reacting? Sometimes we just, you look at other people and you wonder that all the time, like, why are you mad at me? And sometimes we don't even know why we're mad at ourselves or happy or we're happy, but we're crying, or we're sad, but we're laughing, or whatever. Okay. So yeah, you catch yourself getting it wrong every once in a while, and that's just when you catch yourself, confused. So just, think of all the times you probably, you're missing it. And we'll see some examples. If I don't get to it today, then definitely next time we'll be talking about, we'll be talking more about like when we get it wrong, and some theories as to why that is. But first we got to, backtrack and do a little, okay, so how do we, where did all this like interest in emotion come from? It's, as far back as Darwin. Darwin was, in addition to doing all his stuff for, studying diversity and evolution and natural selection and things, He was very interested in emotions, and he studied the emotional expressions of both humans and the behaviors, emotional behaviors in animals, and recognized that okay, he was one of the first as he's looking at selective. What's the word I'm looking for? Natural selection. And passing on of traits, and the advantage of emotions to that whole process of staying alive. So the communication that species do amongst each other and across species, and recognizing when to be fearful. I don't know why that picture is like in every book. I should look, anyway, there's a guy expressing emotion. I don't know. I don't remember why that picture's in there. It's in here all the time. But the thing on the right, I kind of want to mention, this is a classic phenomenon that you'll see all the time. It's this curve relationship is often called the Yerkes-Dodson law. And psychology, being a science, loves, we've always had science envy of the other sciences, the so-called hard sciences, with their laws of thermodynamics, laws of gravity, etc. All right, these principles and these things that are so-called universals, like everywhere in the universe. We should have laws if we're going to be a science, and so Edward Thorndike, one of the early, like classical conditioners, proposed the law of effect, and everybody got all excited about the law of effect. That supposedly, an organism, they like to use those science kinds of words, an organism will repeat behaviors that are adaptive or that have a favorable outcome, and not repeat behaviors that they're punished for. All right. Sounds great, but do you always do the things that had favorable outcomes again, and never do the things that have unfavorable? Do you learn from every single mistake you ever made? Like, well, okay, I'm never ever going to do that again. Doesn't feel so much like a law, does it? Okay. So laws fall apart. Well, this one is about as good a law as we got. So anyway, the Yerkes-Dodson law. I'm still willing to call this a law because it just really seems to apply a lot. And nobody likes graphs. So on one axis here, we have level of arousal just from low to high. And that's any kind of physiological arousal, mental arousal, however you want to determine. And then performance on the other scale from low to high. We don't need numbers on these things. So low to high performance. And so for whatever the task is at hand, you can think whatever the performance is and whatever form of arousal applies to it, there's a peak amount. There's some peak amount that's going to result in the peak performance for you. All right. So, you don't set a world record, in some athletic event when you're just when you're sitting at home on your couch eating Cheetos and just thinking like, hey, you know what, today, maybe I'll break a world record today. Okay. Your performance is probably not going to be too high if your arousal is too low. You need to have some peak amount. And then what do you call that? What's this curve called? After peak, when arousal gets too much arousal, performance drops off. We got a good name for this whole half of the curve. What do you call that? What's a good word for that? Huh? Choke, right? This is choking on this half, okay? Too much pressure, too much stage fright, too much, you're at the free throw line, games on the line, the season is, win or lose the season is, whether or not you make this shot, whether or not you kick this field goal, whether or not you stick this dismount on the, in gymnastics or whatever. Whether or not if you get this score in this exam, I won't have to take that fourth exam. Okay. Anything beyond that, too much arousal can cause you to choke. and your performance drops off. So the trick is to just figure out, like, wind up here with this peak amount of performance from this peak amount of perfect amount of arousal. All right, yeah, Jamie.
So immediately when I see graph my data, if we're looking at this different data inputs, would this be looking at quantitative or qualitative data?
Well, it depends on the question is, when you think of data, like what if you're going to actually plug numbers into this? Would this come from qualitative or quantitative data? It depends on the measurement and the task. Some things could be, performance can be measured, quantitatively, performance on an exam, how fast you run a 100 meter dash. Those kinds of things can be quantified. Some measures of arousal can be quantified. You could take physiological measurements, blood pressure and heart rates and, levels of hormones flowing and so on. Okay, these things can be quantified, or they can just be qualitatively assessed, self-report measures of how you're feeling, how self-reports or other people's measures of performance. Okay. I'm just gonna. We see it all over the place. So I am gonna put air quotes around my word law. So I'm just like, hey, we want to have laws in psychology. This is like the only one I can think of. Like, you know what? There's the best law I'm aware of in psychology. You see this in just about anything that you can measure performance on and talk about, arousal. I can't think of anything where like this curve would be different, like, where, like where it doesn't bend back down, like you'll never get enough arousal. You'll just always get better and better. It's like, no, sooner or later it's going to crack and bend and break. Whether or not it's a perfect curve, who cares if it's a perfect curve, but it's a, and it might not always be so peaky, and sometimes I don't know, but it's it's going to be low on one, it's going to be low on both ends and high in the middle somewhere. Okay, so then we could talk about faces again. So we did a lot of this, so I'm going to fly through some of this. All right, so the last time, I think one of the times we talked about faces, I did talk a little bit about this, but hey, since this is a psychobio class, I'll remind you if I did talk about this again. So faces are we have evolved to make faces be an important source of both communication from others and communicating to others. And we'll come back and talk about, the emotional expression of faces and how it's kind of an arms race. And so sometimes we get it wrong within our own bodies, what we're feeling. We're only about 50-50 at guessing other people's emotions because we're all simultaneously, we've evolved at times to try to conceal our emotions that we're expressing. We don't want to giggle at a funeral. We don't want to let a superior or let a close person, or there's lots of reasons why we don't want someone to know we're angry with them. On and on and on. So we're both trying to conceal our emotions and we're trying to read the emotions, and so the net result is that we're just about as good or bad at detecting them as we are expressing them, and it's just kind of it's an arms race between the two, and we turn out to only be about 50-50 when we're not trained to read facial expressions. And I'll come back to what I mean by trained to read facial expressions. So this is something that we've absolutely evolved to. We got some specific nuggets in our head that do nothing more than process faces. And so here's one of the real biggies. Okay, this fusiform face area. So it's right there, kind of in the base, front bottom of visual cortex, and there's a left and a right one. And if someone has stroke or damage to one or both of those and really little else, they'll be largely unaffected, except they'll just lose this ability to recognize in faces. If the rest of their vision and cognitive processes are fine, these are the people that can, these are the people with prosopagnosia, a condition where they don't recognize faces. Yeah.
So when we were talking about the split between operation and act sort of thing, it was kind of like most people, ability to recognize faces is on the right hemisphere.
Yeah, now I'm gonna come back to that. So we're gonna see how the right nugget is just a little bit more specifically focused on faces. This area it specializes in faces. It's also chugging along processing other stimuli as well, helping us recognize what other stimuli. It's this part of that what pathway that I believe we talked about before. So you have from visual information screams forward from the back of your head to the other parts of the frontal parts of cortex. And the part up to the parietal lobe is the how or the where pathway that tells you where stuff is, how to navigate, what parts are yours, how to avoid hitting your parts and other parts, and so on. The where and how pathway. And then this down to these, especially on the left to the language centers, is this, hey, what is this? What is this thing? What are these things I'm looking at? So, this is where we name and identify what things are. And so the left, and areas around this are doing that. So this particular part of that pathway is really processing faces. And the one on the right is really, really processing faces, as we'll see in just a moment. Okay. Our good friend, the amygdala, is, of course, processing emotional aspects of faces. Okay. So early on, I had you watch a video with Ramachandran, the neurologist Ramachandran. And I hope you watched that. I hope if you did, you will remember the case of the guy that had a motorcycle accident, and then for a while he was thinking that his parents, particularly his father, was an imposter. Remember that, the Capgras delusion. He thought his father looks like my father, acts like my father, but it's not my father. And Ramachandran determined correctly that that pathway must have affected the connections to his amygdala. So, the information about his father, when he looked at his father, got there, but it didn't go the next step to the amygdala. And so the amygdala would have assigned all of the feelings that you would get when you look at your father. You either love or you hate your father. You have emotions about your father, and the amygdala was not getting those signals. And so there was no continuation of that processing. And so the left hemisphere, which is so good at cause and effect and determining things and being logical and like making up stories. It's the part of your brain that makes up the stories when you're dreaming and getting all these random inputs. It gives the delusion that must not be my father, must be an imposter. And the rest of your brain's like, wait a minute, that doesn't happen. People don't, that just doesn't happen in real life. And the left hemisphere says, I don't care, that's what it is. Capgras delusion is, otherwise normal person thinking, just believe in this preposterous notion that must be an imposter. Tanya. Sorry, louder, can't hear you.
Do similar things happen with people with Alzheimer's and dementia?
Maybe, very likely, very likely. That's just, we'll hit that in the next chapter. So hold this kind of questions. So yeah, Alzheimer's is just sort of like so many parts of the brain are being affected by that. So yeah, connections to and from, and maybe the amygdala itself are being destroyed, and maybe that's big. That's going to be a factor in people, like when people all they lose the ability to recognize loved ones and so on. So yeah. All right. So. This superior temporal sulcus, that band of tissue in the temporal lobe, the top of the temporal lobe. Again, part of that, what is this pathway? On the left side, all part of the language and comprehension and producing language. But anyway, this big long stretch of tissue, this big area here is also, really looking at mouths. Okay. When again, we're both expressing we've evolved to express emotions, and we've evolved to like, hey, concentrate on faces. And so what parts of faces tell us about emotions? Well, eyes, but mouths tell us, gobs of what we're expressing. Every emotion has a mouth feature. Okay, none of the emotions are expressed without major involvement of the mouth. And so, yep, this whole area is concentrating on where a person's looking, what they're gazing at, and what's the mouth doing. So what are the eyes and the mouth doing? Okay. And then this isn't really so much a part, just like the whole frontal cortex. Okay. So, this is part, the determining things, making plans, what does all this mean? What's the story here? And then of course, it's involved, if we're going to also talk about attraction, right? We already talked about that in another chapter. So today I'm not going to talk about the face's role in expressing and helping us determine attraction. Okay, so anyway, here's another look at where all those parts are, but that we saw. So just a couple more things about that fusiform face area. Okay, so the left and the right are a little bit specialized differently. Okay, so I don't think this comes from your book. This is from my Sensation and Perception book, but this study used these images, and some of them look very decidedly like faces, and you can tell they're smudgy looking, poor resolution faces. And some of them are not, but then kind of. So anyway, the top row are sort of like from left to right are things that just kind of, they're not faces, but they look more and more like faces as you go to the right. Would you agree? More or less? I don't know. Like this one in the middle is it looks a lot more like a face than, I don't know. I would exchange these two, but anyway, the gist is like, yeah, from left to right, they're getting clearer and clearer as being faces, but none of them are faces. All right, till the very end, when it's like, really, that's not a face? No, none of these are faces. Okay. These are faces that also get clearer and clearer, supposedly from left to right. So these are pretty clear faces, and these are anyway. So these are the images that are used in an MRI study. So people are being flashed these things, and then it's detecting the activity of the facial fusiform area. Okay, so let's take a look at what the left fusiform area is doing. Okay, so forget the labels on here. These just pertain to those images. So there's two categories, and they go from low to high, looking like faces. Okay, so anyway, the more the fusiform face area on the left is showing some. It doesn't matter what this is just a measure of response. I don't know what the response is, but it's the level of activity in this guy on the left. All right, so it's just kind of showing a pretty linear, like, yep. As it gets more and more like a face, we get more and more happy. We get more and more active. Okay, that's the left side. Okay, the right side is just a little bit more persnickety about faces. It's like, no. It's like, it's like not really a face, still not really a face. No, not a fucking face. But then finally, when it's like, the images that are like, yeah, faces, then it's like, yes. So again, just the moral of this study is that the right fusiform area is just a little bit even better at recognizing the correctly identifying faces than the left one is. Does that make sense? Okay, and that kind of takes us back to that left brain, right brain, split brain example where that the guy was when the images were shown on the left side, when it was those objects made up of faces made up of objects, when it was projected to the left side of the screen, therefore going to his right hemisphere, that he was saying that he saw a face. When that same image would be projected on the right and therefore going to his left hemisphere would identify the objects that the face was made up of, books or vegetables or whatever.
But this is like, I don't know how you want now, but especially growing up, when I used to look you like see faces in them? Like if you look at the car that's driving past you,
Yeah.
you like see a face in it or something. You know it's not a face, but it just looks like facial like structures adapt to this.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm pretty confident that your fusiform areas are going, boop, like when I've got a few of those coming up in a moment. Okay, so our face is special? Damn right they are. Okay, so here's another study that just shows things that are obviously not faces and things that obviously are faces, and then these things that are not faces upside down, and these faces that are faces upside down. All right. This doesn't have to be an MRI study. These are just correct. They're just shown very quickly. So this is the task where it's like like the longer you look at it, the more you can recognize that it's a face. But you project these things really quick, and the person has to decide like what that was from just a fraction of a second flash. And if it's when it's a car, doesn't matter if it's upright or inverted. All right. People they were like 90-ish, about 95% accurate in whether it was upside down or upright. But look what happens when it's a face. And again, these are stripped down faces, right? They're like stripped down without hair and ears. They're faces, but they're like not how we normally see faces. So it's already a little bit interesting. I don't know if these are significant differences here, but the fact that we can be 95% sure it's a car, even upside down, and we drop down to 90% when it's just kind of this weirdo face. All right, but still, when it is an upright face, boom, we're very accurate. But when it's upside down, we drop down to 72, 75% only. Okay. Now, while I have this upside down image, and I was just a moment ago mentioning prosopagnosia, this condition where people won't recognize faces. They'll tell you all about the faces. They see the faces fine. They can describe the eyes, the cheeks, everything. Their vision's fine. But just if that, especially right fusiform area is shot, they won't be able to put it all together and tell you whose face it is. And so the best example I've heard someone give for like, what does that feel like? For those of us that don't experience that, what must it feel like? And the person that, the experts say, look at faces upside down. That's what it feels like. So when you look at a face upside down, if I could, when I continue to talk about this, I should have, my next slide should be some famous faces that are upside down. And so I'm sorry, I don't have that ready to show you, but if I showed you some very famous, recognizable people upside down, you would be really hard pressed to identify many of them. If there's aren't cues, like if you can see like it's a movie, if you can tell what movie it is or something like that, that it's a still from or something, without the cues. People with prosopagnosia, if they have the other cues, they can tell you correctly who a face is, but they're not getting that from the face, they're getting it from that context. So without context, when a very recognizable face is upside down, you'll struggle to identify it. Your performance will drop down to something like this, okay? So that's a great example, I think, not knowing how, because I don't have prosopagnosia, but that's an understandable, like you could have it up there for a long time and it could say, tell me what color the eyes are, tell me about the cheeks, are they, you can see all the features just fine, but when it's upside down, your right fusiform area is like, hey, I've evolved to be upright. That's what I do. This is upside down, fuck you. Okay, I can't tell what that is. I can't tell you who that is. All right. So anyway, that's that. So again, more evidence that our face is special. And yes, and what parts of faces are special? A moment ago, I mentioned the mouth. Well, the eyes are super, super key too. And I think I've already given you this. I think I've already talked about this with you. So if you show a full negative of a face, people are only a little better than 50% accurate at determining who that is. I guess this is Newt Gingrich. That looks like Newt Gingrich to me. But anyway, people are only about half good at identifying it when it's a full photographic negative. These are terrible images, and I remember telling you that these are terrible images. So anyway, if the eyes are positive and not negative, look at performance goes almost like up to normal. Like all you need are the eyes. And then what's a full, look at the, a full positive versus just the eyes positive. That's apparently not much of a difference, maybe not even significant. Okay. So all you need are the eyes. And I thought I had then I had a bunch of superheroes on my last presentation. Okay. So like, yeah, like all you do is cover eyes and people won't recognize who you are. Okay, so we're primed to see faces and they're all over the place. And right now as you look at, as I flash through these, your fusiform areas are going, hey face, hey face. Some of you are even recognizing the faces. All right. So I talked about the shroud of Turin already. I don't think I want to talk about that again. I don't know if I showed you that image in my last slide. Did I show you? I'm always surprised at how few students have ever heard of the shroud of Turin. Okay. So-called burial cloth of Jesus. It's very scientifically determined to be a fraud. It's a very clever fraud from about 1,000 years ago, but it's not 2,000 some years ago. It's just been carbon dated. It's just it's pigments. They know unquestionably that it's a fake and a forgery. It's a super intelligent forgery for 1,000 some years ago, but it's not. It could not possibly be the burial cloth of Jesus if Jesus was a person that lived about 2,020 some years ago. So anyway, and I think I talked about these religious examples. Okay, so anyway, that's about identifying faces. Let's talk a little bit about how do we control the expression of faces. All right, so as I think I got a slide coming. Yeah, and the next slide is going to talk about like some of there's a lot of words in that previous slide. I don't want you writing any of those words down. So the innervation of the muscles, of the many muscles in the face and around the eyes. Lots and gobs of muscles are in your face. And lots of nerves are innervating them. And some of them are cranial nerves, the key cranial nerves, facial nerve, and and so on, trigeminal nerve. And there's both conscious and unconscious expressions. Someone puts a camera up and says, smile for the camera. And, you can consciously conjure up your best impression of a smile, or your brain can do it naturally when you're truly happy. All right. And when you're doing it, artificially, only for most of us who are not trained to do it, most of us just do the lips, just do the mouth and the cheeks. And, we don't smile with our eyes when we're, when you're really smiling, your eyes do all kinds of things. The muscles around your eyes squinch up and make your eyes, muscles around your eyes are innervated differently. Okay, so anyway, back to my words. So we got the trigeminal nerve is controlling all kinds muscles and involved with tasting food and chewing food and for speaking, moving our lips and our tongue. The facial nerve is also innervating, involved with facial expressions. So the net result is that the upper third is controlled very differently than the lower 2/3 of the face. All right. So the upper face is receiving signals from both hemispheres, and the lower 2/3 is only receiving from the opposite. Okay. So I'll say that again. So again, the lower 2/3 of your face, in other words, the face, the cheeks, the jaw, they're only getting controlled from the opposite hemisphere. Now we got the corpus callosum, so that that's telling both hemispheres what the other is doing and causing some interference and so on. But the actual innervation of the muscles is only for the bottom third, 2/3 coming from the opposite side. So back to my example of expressions when we are consciously trying to express or not express. Again, when we're consciously doing this, we are probably only driving most of us are only driving the bottom 2/3, and that is pretty exclusively coming from the opposite hemisphere. Information from the eyes is coming from both hemispheres. And there's a conscious thing about that too, but I'm talking more about like, not, you know, you know, voluntary expression versus spontaneous expressions, they call it. Okay, voluntary expression is when you volunteer a smile. Spontaneous expression is when you truly, really smile. Okay, so subcortical systems like the limbic system are involved with real emotions. Okay, so when the real emotion centers are also contributing, then the full face is being is innervating those muscles versus just the voluntary, you know, conscious expression of or concealment of expression. Okay, so this is a classic example. I'm not going to skip that. The book covers it. So we talked about this, and I talked about left versus right half the face. This is Amber's. This is her left face controlled. Fake cheesy smile driven by the right hemisphere. This is her real face. You know, both hemispheres firing away. This is her left. This is her right side of her face coming from the left hemisphere. This is the left hemisphere, you know, faking a smile. So the left hemisphere is making a different expression than that right hemisphere is. Okay. All right. So there's fair. That was me doing it. And we talked about, you know, the faces and the, you know, eyes and mouths matter, right? So when it's you know, yeah, you know, and we've evolved to be upright. We don't hang upside down very often. So, you know, eyes and mouths matter. And if they're in the proper orientation, it looks normal and fine to us until we flip things over. This is called the Margaret Thatcher effect. And we talked about attraction. So I'm going to do this. Okay, back to, all right, emotion, back to emotion. All right. So, 5 minutes left. So I love this guy. This is Paul Ekman. He's a very famous psychologist, now retired from Berkeley or Stanford. Shoot. Can't remember. One of those two. I always get those two colleges mixed up. He made his claim to fame was way back in the 50s, I think, early 60s. He traveled the world and studied expression of emotions, and he went, including to, you know, went to very, very remote places on Earth where very, very few people have ever been to, and where those people have been out of, you know, remote Amazon jungle kind of places and so on. And every single place he went, he found that people can recognize both the express, you know, 6 primary emotions identically, and can correctly identify the expressions of 6 primary emotions, whether from any culture. So, you know, people could identify theirs correctly, and those people who maybe had never seen, you know, European Caucasians, for example, everybody could universally everybody could correctly identify these 6 primary emotions. I don't need to label them. You all can recognize those 6 emotions in this test subject. And this is Paul Ekman doing it. Paul Ekman, then he just spent his whole career studying faces, and then studying detection. You know, he got really interested in this arms race between, you know, about concealing deception. All right. And he can orchestrate his own face, and he's numbered all of the muscles, and so he reads a face and describes it like a musical score, like in numbers and code. And so it's fun to watch him. I've seen him at a conference, and he'll just like he'll put together a face, an expression by number. He'll just like, you know, I don't know the numbers and the codes, but he's got a number for the, you know, the eyebrows and the eyelids and the lips and all the different muscles. And so he'll build a face like, you know, one muscle group at a time, and then so he just studied faces to death. He has since come up with a 7th primary emotion that we call contempt. And this is the only one of those 7 expressions, facial expressions, that is one-sided. Only you do contempt with just half your face. You just kind of do a lip curl. to express contempt. So here's a bunch of famous and not famous people expressing contempt. So anyway, there's now the 7 universal, another label located. Not that you even need the labels, all right? So everywhere you go on Earth, people make at least these 7 and can identify almost universally these 7 expressions. So again, we have this arms race going on between detecting and sometimes concealing our own emotions. And so the bottom line, and we particularly will do this when we're trying to deceive somebody. There's a million reasons why we try to deceive people, and some of them are noble and actually fine and, you know, in good taste, and sometimes it's just obviously for naught. Okay. So can we spot a liar? And Paul Ekman has devoted the whole second half of his career to this kind of question. Can we spot a liar? And we have, you know, there's a so-called lie detector test, which is, you know, physiological recordings. And these things are, you know, they can be good in some contexts, but they're bad in others. All right. So, you know, there's four possibilities. And so it's quite good at only one of them, but it fails at at the other 3. And that's why it's not a permissible piece of evidence in any court. So, and here it is. So, you know, the goal almost always is for, you know, to correctly identify a guilty person. So yes, a guilty person can be identified correctly, you know, maybe about 80% of the time, which sounds pretty good, but that means, you know, sometimes we're not. And that's important. Sometimes it's not. So it's not perfect, but that's the best it can do. Well, you can also have innocent people found guilty with these measures. All right. So 35-40% is just a little bit, not a little bit. That's way too fucking high to be, you know, admissible. All right. Likewise, innocent people should be found innocent by these methods, you know, at least as often, if not more often, than guilty people being found guilty. And so it's just also only like 60% good at correctly identifying you if you're innocent when you are innocent. Okay. And maybe worst of all, it's, you know, 25% of the time it's innocent people are found guilty by these tools. So anyway, this is too big of a mess. So this is just why they're still around. Some employers still make people do these polygraph tests, and it's just, please go away. So I'm going to have to wait till next time to tell you more about Ekman's work, and I'll introduce you to this this once upon a time famous guy named Brian Cato Kalin. So you'll have to wait till Wednesday to find more about that. So on your way out, please, can I have some more of the goodies I brought? So they're on the table on your way.